Hey, I want to give a special shout out to Lothar900. Made me this little clip for my channel. Greatly appreciated, brother. Thank you for taking the time to do that for me. Much love. Fathers, love everyone and welcome. This week we're going to hear a message from Bruxy. Probably going to start a series, I think it's a 3-part series. This week we're going to hear Still Here, soil samples. So sit back and relax. Let's see what the Spirit has to say this week. Welcome to our follow-up series on mindfulness and meditation. For the next 3 weeks, we will focus on the parables of Jesus in the 13th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus was being followed by large crowds made up of a mix of supporters and cynics. It was time to help them open their eyes and honestly admit where they stood with Jesus. So one day, Jesus sat in a boat and said to the crowd standing on the shore, "A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places, where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered, because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seeds fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown." Whoever has ears, let them hear. Jesus.
Whoever has ears, let them hear. These are beautiful words from Jesus that are used multiple times, especially when he is teaching in parables or stories. He is inviting us to engage, to be active listeners. And something else I love about this phrase is that Jesus is also admitting at any given time that in his audience, there are people who have ears to hear and there are people who don't. There are people who are just at a place where when it comes to spiritual things, they're saying the la 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 la. I'm not interested. I'm showing up for a different reason, but I'm not really interested. And that's fair enough. People came to Jesus for a variety of reasons. Some came because they had a sickness in their family. They wanted a healing, but they weren't interested in the message. They just wanted him to heal. Some people just were there for entertainment. They wanted to see the magician do another magic trick. Jesus was their Netflix. What else did they have? They're like, hey, we hear there's a healer over there. Let's just go see. Some people just loved the storyteller. Tell us a story, but they didn't care about the meaning embedded in the message. And so people sometimes came to Jesus for all the wrong reasons. And sometimes people come to church for similar reasons. I need an inspiration once a week. I just want to enjoy this or figure that out. And it's not Jesus focused. And that's fair. We understand people come to the meeting house for a variety of different reasons. And many of them might be wrong reasons, and that's okay. Our job, even if you came for a wrong reason, is to help you stay for the right reason. And the right reason is Jesus. Now that you're here, wonderful. We want to then take some time to help us, because really, the fact is, the Christian church, when it has Jesus at the center, is a beautiful, beautiful, loving entity on the planet. But the Christian church, when it doesn't have Jesus at the center, is a violent, monstrous version of itself. And so having Jesus at the center of our lives is everything. And to invite people who are not Christians to come and join us and to recenter their lives around Jesus, I think is also a beautiful thing. There is no one like Jesus who shows us what God is like and also shows us what how human beings should be like. There's no one who does that like Jesus. And so these parables are an opportunity for us to see Jesus more clearly and kind of reorient where we are at. And that's what we're doing this 3-week series on. We've done a series before about kind of how to meditate, and now we're having a chance to apply that as we look at these parables of Jesus. I want to say up front that each week we'll have homework, and that homework is to go and spend time every day meditating on this passage of Scripture, just as we were doing in the last series. And you can just maintain that, keep it up. And some of you are saying, maintain that? Oh, yeah, right. Right, I was supposed to do that. That's right. Well, this is a great opportunity for you to push the reset button and to begin this week, and hopefully that's going to change how you listen here now on a Sunday. That's what home church can do. You know, in home church you get to go and discuss things, but it's not just about what you learn in home church. Being involved in home church should change how you listen on a Sunday. You become a more active listener because you know I'm going to have a chance to discuss this and process this in conversation later. So your involvement in home church actually changes your Sunday experience, and that should be the same thing for your meditation experience. So you're paying attention now because you're going to go and practice this tomorrow and on throughout the week. That's what my hope is, and I think this is a great time for us all to be starting on that together. Jesus is telling parables. Why is he telling parables? Embedded in the passage we're looking at today, which we won't have time to exegete verse by verse, but I will just summarize. Jesus is asked by his disciples, why are you teaching in parables? They want to know. There's something about Matthew chapter 13 that denotes a shift in the teaching style of Jesus. That's why now the disciples ask, why parables? They notice there's been a shift. Up until this point, Jesus has used some parabolic imagery. He's talked about a wise builder who builds his house on the rock. He's talked about wine and wineskins being like the new message, needing new structures. And he'll use imagery, but this is the first time now he breaks out into full, ongoing parable storytelling to be the primary vehicle through which he teaches. He has not done that before. Why is that? Well, Jesus explains when his disciples ask in Matthew 13 that it goes back to some things that have happened in Matthew chapter 12 and even chapter 11 before that. You see, Jesus has been teaching very plainly in a straightforward fashion, and people don't believe him, or they don't like his message. They don't want to believe, or they don't trust that he is a worthwhile source. And so Jesus validates his message with miracles. And even then they say they can't be real miracles. And when the miracles are so undeniably supernatural, then the religious leaders come up with a new theory. They say, well, obviously he is supernaturally energized to do these miracles. So our new theory is it is the supernatural energy of Satan. That's where it's got to come from. And then finally his own family, not Mary, his mother, but his siblings, say, well, we don't know if he's satanic, but we do think he's crazy. So everybody, I mean, really, if one of your siblings said, by the way, I'm God, worship me, you might come to the same conclusion. I get that. And so that's where his family is at. So that's all at the end of chapter 12. And then, but especially because of the religious leaders, just actually, no matter what evidence he gives, they will not interact with his teaching because it threatens their system. There's something decidedly irreligious about the new covenant. And Jesus fulfills all the things that the religious leaders were stewarding, the sacrificial system and the keeping of the Torah, the law, the rules and regulations and routines. And Jesus is talking about God coming to us directly. And that threatens the religious institution and puts religious leaders out of a job. And so they do not want to hear his message. And so at this point, Jesus shifts to say, I'm teaching in a fashion now that invites my audience to do some work and to make a choice. Do you really think I'm worth learning from? Then you're going to have to ask some questions. You're going to have to lean in and do some processing and become an active listener. I'm not just going to spoon feed you. And if you are not willing to do that work, then fine. You're not going to understand what I'm saying now. I'm moving on to a new form of teaching that provokes a choice. All of that becomes his explanation in the middle of chapter 13. You're going to talk about it in home church this week. But it does set up this whole idea of parables for us. And you'll find then that parables have this dual purpose. Just to summarize what I've been saying. Purpose number one, they help separate the crowd and the committed. Because there are people, while he's having more and more pushback from people, in fact, the religious leaders in chapter 12 finally come to the conclusion that they're going to have to make sure that Jesus is killed. The guy's got to die. That's how extreme they are. And that happens in chapter 12. So now Jesus understands that just because they're showing up for his talks doesn't mean they're committed to him. So there's growing crowds, but those crowds are populated by people often who are opposing him. So parables help separate the crowd from the committed. But then when you become one of the committed, one of his disciples, one of his followers, one of his students, well, then the parables will teach deeper truths in a way that activates your mind, that allows the truths to go deeper. And every time you return to the parables, you can see new things. Not that the parables change, but we change. We change as we go through life. We go into different seasons of life. We go through different struggles, and every time I, Bruxy, come back to the parables, it's a modified version of Bruxy that's returning to the same stories, and I'm seeing new things, and they're applying to me in different ways. So there is no end of rich truth here for us. The Apostle Paul said to Timothy, just to help us get our minds in the right spot for the rest of this series, I think of what the Apostle Paul said to Timothy, a pastor. He said, I want you to reflect on what I'm saying. Now, Paul has already given Timothy some rich teaching, but then he says, now reflect on what I am saying, for the Lord will give you insight into all of this. So I'm teaching you, I'm giving you truth, but now it's time for you to take that away and just reflect, meditate, contemplate, churn it over in your mind on what I've been saying. And I trust that when you do that, you're making space for God himself to give you insight. I don't have to keep shouting at you, keep talking at you to reinforce the point. I've said it. Now I trust if you'll make space to hear God's voice, because God's voice is more like a gentle whisper than like a loud thunder. Make space for that. And that's what we're talking about here. I have a chance to teach on Sunday. You have a chance to discuss in home church, but make space to reflect and let the Lord share insight with you throughout the week. One other thing I'll say before we dive into the parable itself. You will notice in this chapter, there is a word that comes back again and again. It's a Greek word for understand or understanding. Here it is. How would you pronounce that? Exactly. So it sounds like see? Work with me. Suniami. And I mean, I know it sounds like something I'd order a double portion of at the sushi restaurant, but I'd like a second helping of suniami, please. But it is a fascinating Greek word that gets translated understand, but that may not do it justice. It really actually means to take separated pieces and put them back together again, mentally. Which we might say to solve a puzzle or to put the pieces of a puzzle together. And yes, sometimes it can just happen to you like, oh, now I get it. But usually oh, now I get it happens to the person who's been working on the puzzle for a while. And so Jesus is inviting us to be full participators in our own learning experience. Do not just sit there passively and wait for the sermon to come. I say, okay, I am going to suniami. I am going to put the pieces together. I'm going to work at puzzle solving, and it ignites our mind, our souls, our hearts in ways that nothing else does. All right, we're going to dive into our passage. Can you open up your Bibles with me to Matthew chapter 13? Matthew chapter 13. You've either got your own Bible with you that you brought and you can take notes in it. That's great. If you don't, you can look on with a neighbor, or we have visitor Bibles across our sites. Make sure you grab one of those and follow along, Matthew chapter 13. I'll also say this, is that we have a high value in Q&A at the Meeting House, but for this series, like our last series, we have been putting that aside so we can carve out more time to practice some meditation in our Sunday service to launch us off into our week. And so that may be true today. We might have a little time for Q&A. Oakville, that will be on you. Our text question machine's not working as well, so you'll need to be ready to shoot up your hand for a little bit of Q&A before we're done. But otherwise, we want to carve out time for our meditation. That being said, we are supplementing our Sunday teaching for this series with also some blog posts at the Bruxy.com site. And if you go there, in the blog posts on Still Here, if you post a question as a comment, we will collect those and create a Q&A blog post as well and supplement our teaching and respond to questions that way as well. All right, now diving into Matthew chapter 13. It begins with this. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. That same day. So all the events happening in chapter 12 are now rolling into 13. He just finally says, okay, I need to move on. I need to get some space. And he goes down by the lake. Such large crowds, verse 2, gathered around him. So opposition's growing, but the crowds are getting bigger. That he got into a boat and he sat in it, and while all the people stood on the shore, he told them these things. So Jesus has these crowds crowding around him by the seaside, and so he, on the edge of the Sea of Galilee, he steps into a boat that's there, and they might push it out a little bit. And if there's an embankment behind the crowds, it would function as a natural amphitheater. And now Jesus, from the water, is able to begin to teach. Now he sits down to teach as well, because that was the posture of a rabbi in the first century. If you were taking the posture of a teacher, you would sit down. It's almost the opposite. In our culture, someone who's seated is asked to speak. They stand up and they walk to the front to teach. In that culture, someone who's standing, when they would be asked to teach, would sit down to begin to teach. And that was a way of saying, now I'm taking the position of a teacher. What I love about this, too, is that Jesus welcomes people approaching him as a teacher. And for many of you who say, I don't know about this Son of God business, but I think Jesus is a pretty good teacher, welcome. You're among friends. It's a great place to start. Jesus welcomes people who come to him as a rabbi, whether they call him rabbi or teacher throughout the Gospels, never rebukes them for that. And here, they come to him as a teacher, great, I will teach. But here, just so you know, spoiler alert, I have great confidence that if you start listening, I mean really listening to Jesus as a teacher, Jesus will teach you that he is more than a teacher. Be ready for it. But if you're starting there, great place to start. Verse 3. Jesus tells all of them many things in parables, and this is the first time in Matthew the word parable is used. And the very first word out of Jesus' mouth Matthew records is fascinatingly not included in some English translations. Mine here doesn't have it, for instance, and it's the word listen, hear, pay attention. Listen! He's going to conclude by saying, if you have ears, hear. And he begins by saying, listen. A farmer went out to sow his seed. And as he was scattering the seeds, some fell along, and he starts to describe the different soils. This is often called the parable of the sower. It's probably really the parable of the soils. They're what change. The sower stays the same. The seed stays the same. What changes and produces different results is the kind of soil, which Jesus will later go on to call the cardia, or the heart. The soil is the human heart, which changes. So our symbols in what we're about, we've already read it through, but what we're about to read again, is that Jesus sets himself up as the sower. He will say that about himself later in chapter 13. The seed is the gospel, or what he will call the message of the kingdom. The sower is Jesus, the seed is the gospel, and then the soils are the human heart. It also is fascinating that Jesus says this is the message of the kingdom. What's a kingdom? A kingdom is a way of living in relationship with the king and other citizens of the kingdom. And Jesus uses that metaphor with, I'm the king, which means I'm the will that sets the agenda for the kingdom. And I call you into a right relationship with me as your king and with one another as fellow citizens. That's very true, but we might think of a kingdom then in militaristic fashion. When a new kingdom comes and takes over, I think there's pretty much always violence in our fallen world, isn't there? I mean, that's how kingdoms take over. And Jesus says, my kingdom's taking over, but I don't want you to picture it as a violent, aggressive takeover. So he says it's the message of the kingdom and the coming king taking over. And it's like this. You know what it's like? It's like a sower. Just throwing out seed and letting hearts respond. He's taking over with a new way of being in relationship with God, but it is gentle. It's peaceful. It gives permission to respond in the variety of ways that we might respond. And that's beautiful for us, because later on, the early church would see that we get to be in a position where we get to sow the same seed now. Jesus is talking about himself as the sower, but then we're entrusted with the seed of the gospel. We get to sow it. And Jesus is setting an example for us as well as sowers. The kingdom is one of the fruit of the Spirit, the love, joy, peace, and patience, kindness, gentleness. Some of us, I think, when we get our chance, we're not sowers of seed. We are like jackhammers of faith. We're like, believe this. I will get this into you. I will win the debate and the argument and Jesus is, I think, challenging us to say, no, there is a gentleness in how this kingdom spreads that has its own form of beauty. Well, the sower sows the seed. Some fall along a path, and birds came and ate it up, and some fell in rocky places. Didn't have much soil. Sprang up quickly, but the soil was shallow. Sun came up, the plants were scorched, they withered because they had no root. And then other seed, verse 7, fell among thorns, and as they grew up, they choked the plants. And still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. At that point, the disciples asked him, why are you talking about parables? And he explained some of the things that we talked about in our introduction. And then look at verse 18. Verse 18. Here Jesus gives them the interpretation. He doesn't always give the interpretation to his own parables, but for this first parable, he's training them how to listen to parables. In fact, this is the wild thing about this first parable. The parable of the sower, the seed, and the soils is in one sense a parable about parables and how parables are given and how parables are received. It's a parable about how parables work and why parables produce different results. He's telling a parable about what he is doing right now, which is telling a parable. And he's telling a parable about what people are doing right now, which is receiving the parable in seed form in different soils. This is very meta. Right? This is Inception. Right? Jesus is actually telling a story about storytelling and what is happening in that moment. And he says, listen then to what the parable of the sower means in verse 18. Now, verse 19. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand, and here it's not just saying, oh, they're stupid. No. He's not saying, if you're not smart enough, well, God doesn't love you. No. Remember, the word for understand here means they're not actually choosing to want to see it. They're choosing, they don't want to choose to hear it. They don't like the message enough. They don't want to put the pieces together because that might have implications for their lives that they don't like. So they're resistant. If anyone hears and they don't understand, well, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. Those are the birds that pick up the seeds. We hold the truth of Jesus at a distance. That just makes it easier for spiritual dark forces to say, you're right, keep it at a distance. We'll just take that away. And those dark forces are always at play, but those of us who keep it at a distance just make it easier. And so then he says, now that's the seed that's sown along a path. So if we have a picture of a path, we see a place then that is hard soil because thousands upon thousands of footsteps have packed it down. And it may be very true that there are those of you who say, I feel like that now. I feel like my heart is hard. I don't feel receptive. And some of you may be able to point to times in your life where you have just been beaten down. And your hard-heartedness may be understandable from a point of view, but having said that, I pray for a new healing from that. May I just say, too, that each of these categories are not necessarily permanent. For instance, the hard-hearted path would have described Jesus' brothers and sisters at this point in time. That's what we learn at the end of chapter 12. But after the resurrection, they became believers in Jesus. Their hearts changed to good soil. So you may be able to admit, that's where I feel like I'm at right now, but you don't have to stay there. God can work a miracle. But some of us are there. We just don't want to do the work. We don't want the implications of what is really being said. He says, well, that's the path. Well, then in verse 20, the seed falling on rocky ground refers to one who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. The initial response is emotional. It's beautiful. But since they have no root, they only last a short time. You see, when troubles and persecution come because of the world, they quickly fall away. So this rocky ground is not just ground with a few rocks in it. It has a layer of rock just beneath the surface, so the roots can only go down so deep. So the person may be joyful at first, and certainly the gospel should bring joy, and joy is one of the fruit of the Spirit, and joy is embedded in our spiritual practice as Christians. But if that's all you've got, if you're just a person who says, I like the whole Jesus thing because it makes me happy, if that's where your depth stops, then your spiritual root system is not enough to sustain you when life gets hard. And life will get hard. Jesus did not promise ease. He did not promise comfort. If that's why you showed up, you're showing up for the wrong religion. That's not what he promised. He didn't promise ease or comfort, but he did promise depth and richness of relationship. But along with that may even come more troubles, more persecution. But we need to allow our roots to go deep. And if we're just approaching it purely on an emotional level, that won't be enough for us for the days when the emotions don't show up the way we were hoping they would, the way we've gotten used to them being there. He says, we will fall away at the end of verse 21. That's the Greek word scandalizo, to be scandalized. We will be shocked, horrified, and scandalized that I don't feel happy about my faith today. I don't feel the happy, happy, joy that I've always become used to feeling. Because I'm going through a difficult time, and this scandal, like tripping up over the persecution or the hardship, becomes so shocking to us. Some of us may be in that place. And this is an opportunity for us to move past an emotional, purely emotional, a merely emotional experience of God into something that's deeper and richer. And then verse 22, the seed falling among the thorns. Well, that refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. So this person, their roots go down. They actually become a plant. They grow up, but then the thorns around them choke the life out of them. And he says, that's the deceitfulness of wealth. Boy, this really applies to us as a people group at this point in history and in this place on the planet. This really applies to us. We can be growing healthy, but we can be having the life choked out of us as we participate in the materialistic narcissism of our culture. Our culture, which gives us all the tools we want to distract us by stuff. And so whatever is pulling your attention away, be very aware of how that's working in our culture today on this one. Verse 23, but the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. Aha, there you go. They put the work into it. They put the pieces together. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. How they measured the crop back then is actually talking about the crop of seeds. In other words, if after you sow the seeds and then the whole harvest process runs its course. You harvest the wheat, but you also then have seeds for the next crop. And we find from first century writings at that time that the goal for a bumper crop was not just to get the wheat, but to get enough seed for future crops that has multiplied. And the best crop that's mentioned is to aim for a 10-fold multiplication of your seed. So that the next year, the next time you plant, because of your last crop, you're going to have 10 times more seed than you had last time. And here, Jesus says, good soil, when it's got the seed of the gospel planted in it, it's going to produce a crop, not just 10 times, but 30, 60, 100 times. Now, there's something absolutely miraculous about that. That's not normal. And that reminds us, too, that the goal of good soil is not to work to produce the fruit that produces more seed. It's actually just to be receptive. And then God works the miracle of the growth and the fruit that comes and the harvest. That's God working. We just need to be open and receptive and soft and welcoming to the presence of the teaching of Jesus. All right, we want to take a few moments to meditate on this passage and ask God to show us where we're at in this story. Before we do, can I just throw it open to some Q&A? Oakville, anybody here have questions? We've got a hand down here. We've got one person with a microphone, and I know he wants to get his exercise, so all around at the back, too, if you have questions, get ready to pop them up. All right, here we go.
This might be really easy to answer or not. I don't know. Is there a significance to the order in which he describes the yield of the crop? 100, 60, 30. If I were in an investment place, they'd be saying 30, 60, maybe even 100.
Yeah, I love that you noticed that. Thank you for paying attention. And what's interesting is that Mark and Luke tell the same parable at about the same point in Jesus' ministry. In their version, at least in Mark's version, I'm not sure of Luke, you can check it out, someone can double check me on this. In Mark's version, he tells it in the order that you might expect. 30, 60, even 100. And here in Matthew's version, he tells it backwards. I think this says more about the fact that the apostles who are recording the words of Jesus, it's like Jesus trusts them to tell the story in a way that even their telling of the story is going to connect with their audience in a way that it will have maximum impact. And I love that. For instance, in Mark's version, this is said to be a parable about the kingdom of God. And in Matthew's version, he says this is a parable about the message of the kingdom of heaven. Well, what should Jesus say? Well, he probably said both on different occasions, but when telling this parable, which did he say? And Matthew makes the editorial decision to say, well, kingdom of heaven, kingdom of God, very similar. Jews of that day would speak of heaven as they would of God. The way we might say, oh, thank heavens, as a way of saying thank God. And so Jesus trusts his tellers, who are now the sowers of the seed, not to just memorize and parrot, but rather say, how can I tell the story now in a way that'll have maximum impact to my audience? So that seems to be an editorial decision that Matthew made. And we might say, well, in our culture, I think it would be better to start lower and work its way up like Mark did. And Jesus says that's okay. Because the sign of being a good student is never just memorize and parrot. The sign of being a good student is, can I rephrase in my own words to show you that it really got into me? And we see some of that happening even in the writings of the Gospels. And that's a beautiful sign of what Jesus is saying actually being displayed in the way Scripture was written. I love that. So thanks for noticing. Great questions, you guys. All right, let's take a few moments to meditate on this and just bring it back to ourselves. Here's what I'd like to do. I will read through just the parable portion, not the explanation part, because now you know what Jesus was getting at by the hardened path or the rocky ground. It's purely emotional and has a very shallow soil. It's a shallow faith. Or the thorns of the deceitfulness of wealth. You know what they mean. So I'm just going to read through the story itself. I'm going to read through it line by line slowly and give us time to meditate, remembering that some of you might say, you know what, Bruxy, I think I see parts of me in every soil, depending on different days of the week or different seasons of my life. That could be true. These are not fatalistic categories you have to remain in. It's great for us to become aware of where we're at today and always pray that God helps us move towards being good soil. And how can we do that? How can we move towards good soil? God's given us 3 tools. He's given us 3 tools: His Spirit, His Scriptures, and His church. His Spirit, His Scriptures, and His church. I mean, we're right now, let's work backwards. We are the church, the people of God, encouraging one another. And when you meditate by yourself this week, even then you can be aware that I'm a part of a wider family. And when you meet in home church, you learn from each other. So it's always a corporate activity. Even when we're by ourselves, we're part of something larger. The church, the Spirit speaks through the people. And the Scriptures. We're using Scripture as our tool of focus, and we are studying it now and meditating through Scripture during the week. The same Spirit that's in the church inspired the Scriptures, and that same Spirit wants to also just speak to you directly. As you reflect on these things, as the Apostle Paul said, the Lord will make it clear to you. So we gather together, we read the Scriptures, and then we just stop, because God speaks as a gentle whisper, not a loud thunder. And we make space to hear his voice. And I trust you will do that with me this week. And we'll do a little bit of that right now. Could you take a few moments before we close in prayer to just close your eyes? Just close your eyes and take a few moments to hang out with Jesus. We believe he's real, he's present, and his Spirit has something to say to each of us. I want to pray and invite him to speak to us, declare that we are welcome and eager to hear his voice, and then I'm just going to read line by line through this and give us a chance to let it sink in. Heavenly Father, our hearts are open, and if they're closed, then at least we begin to maybe recognize that and begin to desire the cultivation of good soil, the plowing, the watering. Father, we invite you to soften our hearts so we can hear your Spirit's voice now. Hear these words of Jesus. A farmer went out to sow his seed. Stop for a moment and meditate on the gentleness of Jesus, our coming King. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Be aware of those places in your life where you may have grown hard. Some seeds fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Invite the Holy Spirit to go deep inside you and help you grow in areas where maybe you have been resistant. Other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Allow God to show you where you are having the life choked out of you because of the deceitfulness of wealth, acquisition, gain, spending, having more. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. Be open to God, to being the good soil that makes space for his seed, for his truth, the message of the kingdom. And see yourself producing not just good fruit, but more seed that will be distributed to more people, that you might find your joy in that. Jesus, thank you for sowing seeds into our hearts. Holy Spirit, thank you for watering those seeds and for bringing about the growth that we could not produce on our own. Father, I ask that as we then produce more seed, you would give us a vision for sharing that seed far and wide, not with pressure, but with a sense of privilege. Thank you for spending this time with us. We look forward to spending more time with you throughout the rest of this day. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Here I am, down on my knees again, surrendering all, surrendering all, and find
hope that blesses each and every one of you who listen to it. And I hope you do have the ears to hear, and you truly take the time to admit to yourselves what kind of soil you have. And as Bruxy said, it's not permanent, so don't worry. But be willing to admit the kind of soil you have at the different times, and go to the Father and ask Him to turn that soil to the good soil, so that you're able to hear and obey what the Father teaches, and can then share it with others. Don't forget to pray for the children out there, our fellow brothers and sisters all around the world, and for those still stumbling in the darkness, so that they too can someday come to that light. Let me end by saying, may the Father bless you and keep you. May the Father make His face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Father lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. I'll see you next time.